Got great ideas, but no idea how to build a website? Get Bluehost. Their AI design tool creates high-quality WordPress sites super fast. Whether you're a blogger, influencer, or launching a side hustle, Bluehost helps boost your growth with built-in marketing and e-commerce tools. Upgrade to cloud to get 100% uptime and 24/7 security to stay online all the time. Why wait? You've got the vision. Make it real. Visit Bluehost.com to get started.
It's Black History Month in America, and this episode shines a spotlight on a systemic issue in this country. It involves the alarming rate of unsolved missing persons cases with Black women at the center. The issue is deeply examined in the new documentary Vice News Presents When Black Women Go Missing. Here's a preview.
Data tells us that when Black women and girls go missing, they don't get the same response that their peers do.
I've done a lot of advocacy work talking about the worst day of my life.
Many Black women in the U.S. have the same story as Brittany.
I believe that someone has Shamari.
I just lost faith in law enforcement before I even lost faith in finding Crystal.
This department did not do their job.
We would go searching, make calls, follow up on leads.
A lot of young people don't realize that they've been trafficked or exploited.
They're not seen as having been sex trafficked, they're seen as prostitutes.
I want to go home with my daughter.
You have a missing white woman, and they're digging into everything. Friends, teachers.
There's nothing in us that's going to make us stop looking until we see you again.
They don't want to help, I'm going to make them help. Make them help, mama.
Hi, I'm Marquette Shepard, and you are listening to More to the Story, an entertainment podcast where you are always going to get a deeper look behind the scenes of today's top TV and films. In this episode, I'm going to introduce you to a producer from the film clip you just listened to, and one of the women featured in this critically acclaimed documentary, which is now streaming on Tubi. I met the filmmakers behind Vice News Presents When Black Women Go Missing through an invitation from the United States Justice Department Office of Justice Programs. Senior leaders there who are familiar with my work as a journalist covering diverse women's issues recently asked me to moderate a panel about how journalists are using their storytelling skills to serve as advocates for women of color missing persons. I was honored to do so, and the following is a full audio presentation of the panel I moderated with a special introduction by MSNBC host Simone Sanders Townsend. Take a listen, and please note, while the audio isn't the best quality, the conversation is of the highest caliber.
For a very long time in my former life, as I like to say, I spent time as a spokesperson. I worked on campaigns, I advised candidates, I advised companies, and I worked very closely with journalists, many of whom I now sit next to and are my colleagues at NBC News and MSNBC. And I can't tell you how many times, when I go to the conferences and the things and the people say, oh, the journalists are, they have no thoughts, they have no perspective. And I'm like, well, y'all have never been a spokesperson. Because as a spokesperson, when I pick up the phone and I am talking to a journalist or someone in the media apparatus about a story, or when they would pick up the phone and call me, they have a perspective. They have an angle of the story. And as a spokesperson or a communications person, it was my job to listen to what that angle and that perspective of your story was. And if it aligned with what I was doing or what the story I was trying to tell, I want to reinforce what it is that you think you know. If it diverted from what I knew to be true and the story I was trying to tell, I then have to provide you information to shape the story, to try and give you a different perspective. So I didn't go to journalism school. I was a business major. Okay. I just host a show now. But this idea that the journalists come to a story without a perspective is just not true. There is a perspective. Our perspective is informed by information. And we all only know, as I like to say, what we think we know, and far too many of us only know too much. And so I just think what we are doing today, talking about the epidemic, because that's what it is. The epidemic of murdered and missing Black women and girls is so important because so many people do not know. And it makes me think of Ida B. Wells' quote. And Ida B. Wells, who was an American investigative journalist, she was a stalwart of the civil rights movement. She was one of the founding members of the NAACP. She was an educator, sociologist. But Ida B. Wells once said that, she wrote this in 1892, that the people must know before they can act, and there is no educator to compare with the press. There's no educator to compare with the press. But the press, too, must be informed. And as I was thinking about coming here today, I thought about the first time that I interned here in Washington, D.C. I'm originally from North Omaha, Nebraska. And when I was in college, I interned here in D.C. for an organization called Girls Inc., and I worked in their public policy office. And the family I stayed with, they lived way out in a lovely subdivision in Bowie. Okay, every time when I would get up to go to work in the morning, I had to walk 10 minutes to the bus stop, then take the bus to the metro, then take the metro into the city, then walk from the Farragut North metro stop. I was getting up way early. And the metro was expensive then. The metro's expensive now. Sorry, Mayor Bowser. And I would usually wait to leave work because it was easier it was a little cheaper after 7. Somebody's nodding in the back. Yes, it's cheaper after 7 when you take the metro. And one day I got on the metro, went to my bus stop, and I got on a different bus. So I'm like, oh, this is, I asked the bus driver, is this the bus that will take me to where I regularly go over in this neighborhood? And he tells me yes. I get on this bus, and I'm on the bus for like 20 minutes. And I'm in a neighborhood that I don't recognize. And it's dark because I told you all I'm waiting to get on the bus stop to 7. And I pull the thing, and I get off in a neighborhood that I do not know. The streetlights are on. My phone's not working. I'm like, this is straight out of a true crime movie. And my phone is literally inoperable. Literally. The only number I could call was 911. I don't want to call 911. So I'm from Nebraska. So I see where the porch lights are on. And I go to the doors, different doors. I knock. I have my little bag from work. I have my little suit on. Nobody opens the door in this lovely subdivision somewhere out in Maryland. I finally call 911. And I tell them, it's not an emergency. I'm not hurt. But I got on this bus. I'm in a neighborhood that I don't know. I'm not from here. And I'm wondering if you could send an officer to help me. Because, I must have thought I was somebody else. And about 15 minutes later, officer shows up. 2 cars come. And the officers get out of the car. And I'm standing there with my little Girls Inc. bag, my little suit, my little flats. And I say, oh, my goodness, so thank you so much for coming. He's like, step back. And I say, step back. I called you. We're just trying to figure out what's going on. My phone is inoperable. I go back and I explain to the officers everything I just explained to you. And the officers question me what I was doing out here. Where do I really work? Where am I actually from? What do I really do? And why was I knocking on people's doors and loitering on their porches? Because, sir, my phone is inoperable. I'm not from here. Where I'm from, we knock on the door and the neighbor will help you because I'm from Nebraska. And I tell the officer, I really don't appreciate how you're speaking to me because I called you because I needed help. And it seems as though you were talking to me as though I am a suspect. And he says, you seem to have an attitude. You seem to not want our help. So we're just going to go. And these officers get back in their cars and they drive away. And they leave me on this random road in the dark. My phone is inoperable and I'm crying. I end up going door to door to door to door to door, just knocking and crying and hoping that somebody will open the door for this little bald Black girl with her little Girls Inc. bag out in the middle of nowhere. Finally, someone opens the door. I call the one number I know with the family that I'm staying with. And the family that I'm staying with, the husband works for the FBI Missing Persons Division. And they have been looking for me because I didn't come home. I call and I explain what happened. They come and get me. And I was in a position of privilege because I could call somebody. Somebody cared about me. Somebody cared about where I was and what I was doing, and I didn't show up. But there are so many Black girls that look like me who are not in that position of privilege, that nobody is out there looking for them except for their families. That when they tell their story to the law enforcement officers that show up, they think something else is going on. That is why having journalists as advocates is important. That is why having people who understand, who are sympathetic, who want to learn are very important and critical. I don't think those officers meant me any harm, but I am somebody's daughter. I'm somebody's sister. I'm somebody that need help, and they left me on the road. Lord knows what could have happened to me. Thank goodness for the man in that suburb that opened the door. So you all are in this room because you do this work every single day. You care about this issue and so many more. A convening is to come together. It's kind of like a little revival. You know, I grew up Baptist. It's a little revival for us to get the tools and the tips and take it back to our everyday spaces and places. But make no mistake, there are people in our communities all across the country that don't think the girls that we are talking about today deserve the time and attention to be found. There are people that assume that there's something else going on with these girls and why they were missing. And it is our job to help find advocates and allies in the work, to educate the people and to uplift the stories.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simone, for that introduction. And I want to thank Linda Seabrook as well for inviting me to be here today. The personal stories that both Linda and Simone shared are deeply touching to me, and I think relatable if you have a conversation with any Black woman who's been living long enough on this planet, let alone in America. And I want to introduce you today to two women who are on the front lines of this fight to not only amplify the voices and the faces of missing and murdered Black women, but also protect future generations in our country. So Lakeisha Lee is the sister of Brittany Clardy. She's featured in the Vice News Presents documentary, When Black Women Go Missing. She is an advocate and an activist who pushed her pain into purpose. We're going to hear more about her story in just a few seconds. Next, I want to introduce Arlissa Norman, producer and director of Vice News Presents When Black Women Go Missing. This is a 70-minute documentary that took 3 years to produce. And she had to fight through funding issues, through company issues and things to get this film made. And it is making waves across America ever since it came out in March. But I want to start with you, Lakeisha. I read a startling statistic that 250,000 people of color go missing in America. That's 40% of all missing people, if not more, are people of color. One of those people was your sister. And what happened in your story where you had to not only be a family member of a missing person, but then you also had to become an activist?
My sister went missing in 2013. When she went missing, we were so scared. We had nowhere to turn to. We didn't know what to do. We contacted the police. And from that moment, when we were told, oh, she just turned 18, she's probably with her boyfriend. That moment, we were the experts on our family and we needed help and we needed it now. And we didn't receive that support. I knew that moving forward, unfortunately, she was found not alive, but moving forward, I knew that I had to do something to change that. This has been a horrible tragedy that's changed our lives in Minnesota. When my sister was found, it shattered our worlds. It's something that completely changed the way that we view the media, the way that we view working with police officers and law enforcement. And that's why I became an advocate and activist to move for missing and murdered Black women and girls today. There was nobody doing the work. I didn't know who else to turn to. And everybody that I encountered and worked with throughout growing and trying to understand what was happening in my state, nobody looked like me. It was an uncomfortable process trying to navigate the system.
You say it's still very uncomfortable because people don't understand the amount of resources and hours that you put into the foundation that you started in honor of your sister and to help others. And the work is still being done up until getting a piece of legislation enacted on behalf of your sister. Tell us about that.
Once we started growing and learning about the differences all over, all of the Black girls that have gone missing and the families that were in need, connecting and meeting with them, we're hearing the same stories over and over. We're losing our jobs. We're banding together to try to make ends meet. Search parties, really connecting with each other. So we built the foundation to help support that. Moving forward, learning about what was happening, I connected with former Representative Ruth Richardson as she was growing at the legislature, the Task Force for Missing and Murdered African American Women and Girls in Minnesota. Championed that work by joining the task force, leading that work, and now in Minnesota, we now have the first office for missing and murdered Black women and girls.
In the nation.
In the nation.
In the United States. Wow. I'm actually getting chills listening to this, but I know that you have spoken to many media outlets since 2013, but it was something different about Arlissa's production. Arlissa, congratulations on this phenomenal documentary.
Thank you.
I don't know if all of you have seen it, but I highly recommend it. If you have seen it, then you know what I'm talking about. The stories are similar, as Lakeisha said. A family member goes missing in a Black household. They call the police. Across the country, disconnected police departments, they're given the same story. And what did you find in your documentary or in your research that led to the final cut of this film?
As you were saying, we started this documentary, like the reporting process, back in 2019. And it was around the time that Gabby Petito went missing. And, you know, everybody across the nation, everybody was covering it. It was all on social media. And, you know, being a journalist, we had seen, you know, different reporting here and there about how when Black women and girls go missing, they never get the same energy. So it was around that time that we started to look into it and make some calls and start trying to talk to people. And as we were talking to folks who had experienced this, they were all saying the same thing. They called the police. They had trouble getting the initial police report taken. They felt like the police weren't taking their concerns seriously. It was, oh, they probably went off with their boyfriend. Oh, like a lot of times it was the boyfriend. They probably just ran away. And the family, meanwhile, is maintaining like, no, like I know my sister. I know my daughter. I know my friend. They would not do this. And you're not listening to me. So then it was kind of like, you know, all of these families were kind of doing their own investigations. In the documentary, we kind of feature 3 different families, 3 different sisters who are at different points in their journey, having someone that they love go missing, having a woman that they love go missing. So Lakeisha, her sister, had gone missing 10 years ago. Shadira was in South Carolina, and her sister had been missing, I think, for a year at that point. And then we had Shamari Brantley's family in New York, who was currently looking for Shamari. And Shamari's family is from Chicago. So they were actually driving back and forth to New York every weekend, staying at crazy hotels, going around a city that they don't know, handing out flyers. And so, yeah, we found a lot of consistencies in what everyone was saying. And also that everybody was also feeling like they had a lack of resources available to them to be able to get through like one of the most traumatic times in their lives.
Yeah. And Lakeisha mentioned people are losing their jobs because they're making a decision. Do I get up and go to work in the morning, or do I go look for the missing Black woman in my family? And every second I learned in your documentary counts. Mm-hmm. And when they call the police, there's something that happens that is a fork in the road, right? The police can either classify this as a runaway case or a missing persons case, what happens most of the time?
I don't know. I would say in some cases we did learn that, especially like with young girls, they are often misclassified as runaways. And I think also something that we learned in our reporting was even like the intersection between like missing and with young women, like young girls who have grown up in foster care and like running away from different places. So when you're labeled as a runaway, you're also not getting treated like you're missing it. So you're all the resources that are dedicated to looking for somebody who was classified as missing and as a runaway are not the same. So really nobody's looking for you. You're labeled as a runaway. But I think one of the other important things that we learned in our reporting was kind of how closely trafficking can be related to when a young girl has gone missing. And so even the language of like runaway versus being groomed by an abuser and lured away, I think that there needs to be a lot more education about how we're speaking about that nuance. And yeah, like they may have, there's a woman we interview and she says it so perfectly, but she's like, they may have physically left on their own, but emotionally they were groomed, they were lured away. And when we don't factor that into a missing persons case, it's crazy.
And they also don't get an Amber Alert. If you're classified as a runaway,
you do not.
You don't get an Amber Alert, so people aren't getting on their screens and their TVs while they're driving.
No.
And that's what happened in your case.
Yeah, when my sister went missing, we were told she just went missing. She's probably with her boyfriend because in the Twin Cities, we're very close to Chicago. They said she probably went to Chicago. That's a big city. They probably went there, and even her paper, in the newspaper, the local newspaper, they posted her picture. It was the size of the front page. And underneath her picture, it said prostitute in bold letters. We had to run away from our home with reporters on the front lawn. We were in shock and mourning and we're trying to find her. And this is the narrative that you're creating about my sister who works with children every day. You're not mentioning the fact that she's just graduating high school. She works with children every day. That's my sister that works with your kids, with your youth. This isn't a prostitute and somebody who was working and was killed. She was lured away. So we didn't trust the media. We didn't trust anybody who wanted to talk with us about my sister's story, even the officers, because when we first talked with them, they created their own narrative too. So we had to take control and take charge from there to be able to say, no, let's tell the truth. Let's bring the truth to light about what's happening and really fight for other families who weren't getting that support either.
Brittany was lured away by a predator. The law enforcement let you down. The media let you down and misrepresented Brittany's story. And you said just now, you don't trust the media at all. But then Alyssa and her production team, wonderful host, Alexis Johnson, also an African-American woman, they come calling and they want to tell your story. And all of a sudden, there's a Black woman-led production team inquiring about your sister's case. How does that change the information you share and how you feel about fighting for justice?
It changed the way that I was even comfortable talking about my sister because they can relate. I had watched Alexis and Alyssa on Vice News before. That's the only news media channel that I had trusted at that time because there were people that looked like me telling stories all over the world. I felt completely at home with them. I felt like I was able to trust my sister's story, as well as let me connect you to other people that need their voices heard. We wanted to really emphasize giving voice to the voiceless. And they did that. They have done that. And I'm so grateful to you guys.
Hey, no, I was just saying, like, it's an honor to be trusted with someone's story. And so, gosh, I don't know what to say. No, I was really.
But Alyssa, you said that you took your time with your interview. I want to say that two other women who are featured, Shamari Brantley and Crystal Anderson, are the other two missing Black women, and only one came home alive.
Yes. Yeah, Shamari Brantley, they were able to find her in New York eventually, and it really was because of the legwork that the family was doing. Somebody recognized her, one of the flyers that they were hanging up, and in an Apple store, they called the police, and they waited until the police came, and they were able to get her to a hospital. Shamari also was, having issues with mental health, and so it was really incredible that happened. Crystal was presumed to be dead, and what's really awful in that situation is that originally when her sister was reaching out to the police in the first 24 hours that her sister was missing, she was trying to explain that she was in a domestically violent relationship and she had concerns about this guy and where she was. And she really felt that the police weren't taking her seriously. She had recorded an initial phone call that she had with the police department in Wagner. And I had chills listening to that. She had sent it to me and I hadn't had time to listen to it as we were reporting. And I'm home on a Sunday night listening to this call and just how she was being spoken to. She's just some angry Black woman who, there's nothing I can do. If you're going to be disrespectful, I'm going to hang up. And eventually, this call goes on for a minute and then the police officer just hangs up on her. And she's I had chills and I just immediately texted my colleagues hey, you guys need to listen to this phone call. But one thing I will say about how we were able to do this is we didn't have just a 15-minute segment or 5-minute segment. We actually had a lot of time to be able to spend with the families. We would have 2-hour interviews, not 5 minutes. We sat with people, we talked with them on camera, off camera. Initially, when I met Crystal's sister was at a gathering kind of like this in LA, and I just showed up and I sat with them and her private investigator, and I didn't ask them anything. I just participated. And then afterwards, I was if you would like to share your story, please do. And so I do think that there was just a level of care that we were able to have, Alexis and I specifically, because we're Black women ourselves. And so it's just a different kind of connection that you feel when you're a part of a community that you're reporting on. And so having, kind of even sitting with your families, being in your homes, being in people's cars, seeing their kids, you go home and you go back to the office and you're I have a responsibility here to do right by these people and do right by these stories. And so how can I use my skill as a journalist and as a storyteller to really just uplift their own voices and have their stories be able to connect with a greater audience. And so that's what we attempted to do.
And you stuck with the story throughout insurmountable or seemingly insurmountable odds, because your journalism, I believe, turns into advocacy when your news operation files bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So most people, if the job says, sorry, we can't pay you, you don't show up the next day. Mm-hmm. But you showed up.
Yeah. So Mercedes went bankrupt at some point when we were reporting. So actually, a lot of our colleagues were losing their jobs. We would wake up one day and half of the newsroom would be gone. And at one point, all of us that were working on this stock were on the chopping block. And it was at the very last minute that somebody higher up saw our names on the list and was they're working on something that has a delivery date. We got to keep them on. So actually, this was the last project that I was able to finish. And I'm just really thankful that we got to do it. We got to do it well. Even with the dwindling resources and the walls, the building crumbling around us, I think we did still have the support to continue to do this and do it well. Could we maybe have done it a little bit better had we had a different work circumstances? Sure, probably. But I'm happy with what we were able to do with what we had. But yeah, everybody is gone. None of us are working at that place.
That's crazy. One thing I'd love for you to share, Alyssa, with audience, a lot of people don't understand how the inner workings of a newsroom works and how journalists fight for their story to be told and to advance the story and tell part 2 and part 3 and give updates. You did that in this production. And can you talk about, there's also a journalist in your film who also is fighting to tell this Black woman's story, but she has to get through news management first.
Yeah, I'll start with Harry. So Harry is a local reporter in Augusta, Georgia, and they also cover South Carolina, how it is. And she has done incredible work covering Crystal Anderson's case from the very beginning. She saw Shadira, Crystal's sister, post on Facebook and then connected with her from there. And just like every step of the way has been committed to uplifting Crystal's story, getting information. She just never let it go. And when we were speaking with her, she's like, I connected with it because I'm a big sister. And if this had happened to my sister, like I would want somebody to pour everything that they had into it. And so she was in it. She was finding out information. She was making calls. She was driving places to get records. And to this day, I think that her and Shadira still have a relationship, and she's continuing to report on it, even as, Crystal's case just keeps getting delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed. And so it is a lot. You do have to push for your stories in a newsroom. And in our newsroom, I would say we had a lot of support to do this right, or honestly not do it at all, which I think is even very powerful, because we felt very strongly that we needed different families at different parts. And it's really hard to get access because they're going through crazy situations. Why would they want to talk to a journalist for 5 minutes? They already probably don't trust the media, maybe been burned by them before. And so you're trying to build trust, but also in even like the case of Shamari's family, they're trying to find their daughter now. We're talking about a documentary that's going to be released months from now. So it's even that, them being with them and them being willing to let us film with them, is that they're seeing long-term what the benefits could be to help someone else too. So I think we worked on it for 3 years, partly because we were having trouble getting access to the and keeping to actually have something to show. And we kind of shelved it for a while, and we put it down because we're like, well, if we're not going to be able to do it right, then perhaps we're not the people to tell it. And I think that even is powerful in itself for a newsroom to kind of let you have that flexibility, because sometimes you're on deadline. It's you just have to deliver something, and maybe you're not as proud of the thing that you end up delivering because it could be better. But I'm grateful that we had the time, and it just worked out with the timing that we had Lakeisha, and then we had Shadira, and then we were able to connect with Shamari's family as we were already filming and reporting. That happened along the way. And so it really was a very documentary for sure.
Lakeisha, what has been the impact since March, when this documentary first premiered, until now?
It's not a coincidence, but it is a coincidence that since March, our office opened in Minnesota. Which you all will hear from Kalina as our conversations move forward today. But since then, there's been more and more connection for families. Our foundation is now growing, incorporated. We hope that people understand these Black women and girls, we're not working. We're the grassroots. We're nonprofit. Usually, we're on the ground. We need resources. When they say support your small businesses, there's not necessarily something that you can buy, but if you want to donate, please support these nonprofit, the grassroots organizations that are on the ground who are looking for their loved ones. Our website is beclarity.org, where you can learn about Brittany Clarity. You can learn about the different initiatives that are moving forward. We've connected with Representative Ilhan Omar in Minnesota, and now we have a federal bill. So connect with that as well. You can find the information on our website about the Brittany Clarity Act, because there needs to be something federally where we can share information. There needs to be an office where these things can be housed, and where people look like us, where we're trusted, and we can trust the people that we're connecting with and talking to share our stories, share those narratives, and bring our girls home. Find us when we're missing, not necessarily when we're murdered. Bring us home.
Tell us the website one more time.
It is www.be, as in boy, clarity.org. Beclarity.org.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Arlissa, I know that you are continuing your work in documentary filmmaking. What is your call to action to this audience, and what's next for you in your advocacy and journalism?
I mean, I think the second one is we'll figure it out. But yeah, but I think actually, I'm actually really encouraged that this is happening. We went to a screening earlier this year, and it was really cool to see a lot of people who are already doing work in their communities be there and like be able to talk to one another. So I mean, I'm hopeful. Like I would hope more of that continues. That people are pulling resources, sharing data. I hope that there is more data that becomes available. I think that would be really, really useful. Looking for numbers and actually doing the research to figure out like what are the statistics everywhere, because I think that was really missing. So I hope that coming out of this that there's more collaboration within states themselves and across the country to be able to pull resources and get plans in place to find missing women and to prevent them from being murdered. And for me as a storyteller, like I hope to continue to produce documentary features and or series about issues of social justice and I mean inspire social change. That's I feel like a very cool thing as a journalist to be able to see something that you made have impact and maybe possibly be able to bring change for the better. So it sounds like corny, but like really it's pretty cool.
And it changes the world. Thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Marquette Shepard, the moderator of the panel that you just heard, here back with you. I hope that listening to this conversation added value to your understanding of missing persons cases in the United States. If you'd like follow-up information, there is a blog post on my website, glowstreamtv.com. Just search When Black Women Go Missing and you'll find it. There are also photo highlights from the event on my Instagram feed at Marquette Shepard. Now, if you have a recommendation for a great documentary, a film, or even a TV series and you'd like it to be featured on a future episode, DM me at Marquette Shepard on Instagram and let me know what you're watching right now. That's all for this week's show. Follow, rate, and review the podcast to help others find this episode. Thanks for listening.